Did you know that Max Verstappen's Friday in Australia was seconds away from becoming a much bigger technical disaster than what we saw on the timing sheets? Because what looked like just a chaotic Friday actually exposed several hidden weaknesses in the new Red Bull. Before we go on, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Red Bull is really in trouble this weekend? Or are they just hiding their true pace? And the big question is this: what really happened with Verstappen's car in Melbourne that made his Friday look like a complete nightmare? Stay until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out what really happened in practice for the Australian Grand Prix. Because beyond the times on screen, there were technical issues, on-track mistakes, and strategic details that completely changed the reading of Red Bull's Friday. And some of those details were barely mentioned during the broadcast. Friday at Albert Park began with an eerie feeling inside the Red Bull garage. From the outside, it looked like a normal practice session, but internally the team knew this circuit would test several sensitive points of the RB22. Albert Park combines very fast acceleration straights with medium-speed corners and some slow braking zones that demand a lot of car rotation. It's a track that punishes cars that aren't yet perfectly tuned in terms of aerodynamic balance and weight distribution. And those were precisely two of the areas where Red Bull was still searching for answers after preseason testing. The problem is that Friday's work program depended entirely on a clean session. The engineers had prepared a very specific plan to test energy maps, compare new aerodynamic configurations, and validate how the car responded on long runs with the technical package they brought to Australia. Under normal circumstances, the second practice session is where Red Bull usually establishes its strategic foundation for the entire weekend. It's the time when they study the actual tire degradation and fine-tune the car's balance for race pace. But that plan began to unravel almost immediately. As Verstappen left the pit lane to begin his first serious run of the session, the car came to a complete stop and had to be pushed back into the garage, an incident that cost valuable minutes in an already limited session. This initial interruption not only reduced track time, but also forced the engineers to reorganize the entire technical program for the session on the fly, something that in Formula One often means sacrificing important setup comparisons and working with far less information than anticipated. The moment that truly changed the narrative on Friday came in the final minutes of the second practice session. Up until that point, Verstappen was still trying to make up some of the time he'd lost at the start of the session, aiming to complete some fast laps and, above all, gather useful information about the car's behavior in more representative conditions. The problem is that Albert Park is a circuit where mistakes appear suddenly. The fast corners offer very little margin for error, and any slight imbalance in the car can turn into a loss of control in a matter of tenths of a second. That's exactly what happened when Verstappen entered turn 10. At that point on the circuit, the cars approach at high speed with a lot of downforce working under the floor of the car. In the middle of that cornering phase, the RB22 suffered a snap of oversteer, a sudden reaction from the rear axle that caused the car to lose stability abruptly. Verstappen had to correct quickly to avoid a direct hit on the barriers, but he still ended up running off the track, going onto the grass, and across the gravel before regaining control and returning to the pit lane. The technical consequence of that incident was more serious than it appeared on television. The car returned with damage to the floor, one of the most critical aerodynamic components of modern Formula One cars. The floor is the element that generates much of the downforce on these cars, and when its surface or geometry is altered, the airflow beneath the car no longer behaves as the engineers intended. This means that any subsequent lap no longer reflects the car's true performance because the car is no longer operating within its ideal aerodynamic window. It wasn't just a scare or a brief excursion off the track, but an incident that ended up contaminating much of the data the team needed to collect during the session. Looking at Friday's timesheets without knowing the full context, the conclusion seemed quite clear. Red Bull wasn't at the front, and Verstappen was far from the top positions, while other teams occupied the most prominent spots in the session. Oscar Piastri was one of the drivers who set the pace in practice, while the Mercedes also showed very competitive speed from the start. At first glance, the impression was of a Red Bull struggling and out of sync on one of the circuits that has historically been difficult to interpret the true performance of the cars. But the reality within the paddock was quite different. The engineers know that practice times, especially those from Friday, rarely tell the whole story. Each team runs different programs, with different fuel loads and aerodynamic setups that often aren't aimed at setting the fastest lap, but rather at gathering data. In Red Bull's case, much of the day's plan focused on understanding how the RB22's new technical package performed on long runs, which requires running with more fuel and managing pace very differently than in a qualifying simulation. This nuance completely changes the interpretation of the times. During pre-season testing, Verstappen's car had shown remarkable consistency in race simulations, with minimal variations between laps even on long stints. This type of stability usually indicates a car that keeps the tire within its ideal window for many laps, something crucial at a circuit like Albert Park, where degradation can become a decisive factor. Furthermore, several independent telemetry analyses suggested that Red Bull was managing the hybrid system with very high efficiency, avoiding the electric power cut at the end of the straights that other teams were experiencing. Although the Red Bull car still projects an image of strength from the outside, the team knows that the RB22 still has several weak points that could complicate weekends like the one in Australia. One of the problems that had already surfaced in pre-season testing is the difficulty in achieving the car's minimum weight under the new technical regulations. In Formula One, a few extra kilos might seem irrelevant to the spectator, but for the engineers, they directly limit weight distribution and how the car can be tuned for each circuit. When a car doesn't reach the ideal weight, the margin for balancing the car between the front and rear axles becomes much smaller. Adding to this challenge is an issue that is even more concerning within the Red Bull garage: the reliability of the hydraulic system. During winter testing, the team already lost several hours of track time due to failures in this system, something that completely disrupts the testing program because it affects multiple components of the car simultaneously. The fact that the RB22 stalled in the pit lane at the start of the session has reignited concerns, because in such a competitive championship, any reliability issue can arise at the worst possible moment, whether in qualifying or even during the race. There is also a more subtle issue related to the car's dynamic behavior. Verstappen has pointed out on several occasions that the car doesn't always turn in slow corners with the agility he prefers. This forces the engineers to find a delicate balance in the setup, trying to maintain a very stable rear end in fast corners without sacrificing the car's ability to turn in slow hairpins and chicanes. On a circuit like Albert Park, which combines both types of corners, finding that balance can become an extremely tricky task. There's a technical element that went largely unnoticed and could completely change how this weekend unfolds. Red Bull didn't arrive in Australia with the same car they used in preseason testing. The team brought a specific technical package for Albert Park, with significant modifications to the floor, diffuser, and various details related to the integration of the Ford engine and the thermal management of the hybrid system. These kinds of updates aren't always immediately apparent, but they often have a huge impact on how the car generates downforce and maintains stability in different phases of a corner. One of the most relevant changes is related to the diffuser and the airflow geometry at the rear of the car. The engineers have worked on redesigning the narrowest part of the diffuser to increase downforce without sacrificing straight-line speed, an extremely valuable combination on a circuit like Albert Park. This track has several high acceleration zones that demand aerodynamic efficiency, but it also features a series of medium-speed corners where rear stability is crucial for maintaining speed through the turns. According to some internal simulations by the team, this change could represent a significant gain in the second sector of the circuit if the car stays within its ideal aerodynamic window. In addition, very specific work has been done on the car's energy management. Red Bull has refined the integration between the engine and the ERS system with the aim of improving the consistency of the electric power delivery during long runs. In simple terms, this means the car can maintain a more stable power delivery lap after lap without suffering energy cuts at the end of the straights. On a fast street circuit like Melbourne, where every corner exit demands strong acceleration, this advantage can translate into a race pace that will be very difficult to match if the car manages to run without interruption. The big question after everything that happened on Friday is whether we're truly seeing a vulnerable Red Bull or simply a team that hasn't yet been able to show its true pace. On the one hand, the mechanical issues, the time lost on track, and Verstappen's incident leave the impression that the team arrived in Australia with more unknowns than expected. But on the other hand, There's also the possibility that the RB22 still has hidden performance potential that simply couldn't surface in practice due to all the interruptions that plagued the session. If Red Bull manages to resolve the technical problems, fully repair the car, and complete a clean program in the next session, we might discover that Friday's nightmare was just an illusion created by the circumstances. The key will be whether the team can get the car back to its ideal operating window. If the engineers manage to resolve the mechanical issues, fully repair the aerodynamic damage, and complete a clean program before qualifying, the situation could change rapidly. In Formula One, the difference between a troubled weekend and a dominant victory often hinges on small adjustments discovered in the final hours before qualifying. So Friday leaves one question open. Are we seeing a vulnerable Red Bull, or simply a car that hasn't yet shown its true pace? Let me know your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.